Hi everyone, my name is Gerry Cobb and I'm Director of State Services for the BUILD Initiative. We're excited to host this webinar today on behalf of the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative, which is a partnership of BUILD and the First 5 Years Fund. This collaborative was created in part by the eagerness of private funders to support this opportunity for increased federal investment. When it started in 2011, the collaborative was clear that it had several goals, which included supporting states as they seek to apply for, implement, and document outcomes related to the Early Learning Challenge. BUILD's role in the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative is to coordinate technical assistance and learning community activities. And this webinar is one of a series of webinars geared towards the Round 3 applicants. So we're glad that you're all here and appreciate your taking time from your planning and proposal writing to be a part of today's webinar. In terms of people on today's webinar, we had leaders from 26 states and the District of Columbia saying that they would participate. So we look forward to everyone's involvement. At the end of the PowerPoint, I'll say a little more about the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative, including announcing some future webinars and letting you know about technical assistance that is available to your state as you begin to prepare your application. You'll also see our website for the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative. That was developed in Round 1. And we've now added new resources and tools that will support your planning and writing efforts for Round 3. And that address will be on the last slide of the PowerPoint on today's presentation. On the logistics front, all of you except the presenters are muted. We'll offer you a number of opportunities to ask questions, and you can either write them in the chat box on your computer, or if you want to speak to the presenters, we can do that as well. Just raise your hand. Miriam Calderón, our moderator, will recognize you and ask you then to unmute your phone by pressing *7. And as I said, you can also just type a question in the chat box. And as we see those where it makes sense to integrate them into the conversation, we'll do so as well and try and cover as many questions as possible. We'll also provide time at the very end of the webinar as well. This webinar is different from some of the others that we've been doing if you've been participating in our entire series. Where before we particularly focused on specific sections and gave you pointers based on the previous applications, this one's going to be focused instead around specific priorities of the application and also a specific strategy that we think would be helpful to you in writing into the application and garnering you greater support in terms of points. This particular one, and you'll hear more about this during the webinar, is going to focus on high-need children and also the competitive priority around P3. Now we're not going to talk in general around P3 strategies. As I said, this will be focused on one particular strategy that we're very excited about. We'll also talk about, as part of this strategy, an opportunity for a cross-state collaboration that you could write into the proposal as well. The federal government has really emphasized that they would like to see states creating more cross-state collaborations that are written into their proposals. As we saw on the last, in Round 1, 2 different cross-state collaborations were proposed, and many of the states who proposed those collaborations were funded. One was was with Maryland and Ohio around kindergarten entry assessment, and another one was with the state of North Carolina, Delaware, and Kentucky around their program quality assessment tool. So this is another opportunity that we're offering to you around a cross-state collaboration that you could consider interjecting into your proposal. And we'll talk more about that as well. We recognize very clearly that you're in the midst of the planning and the writing, and you don't have time to reach out to states and to see who might want to collaborate with you on an idea. So we're trying to do that work for you and create these opportunities and put them out for you, and you can decide what you want or what you don't want. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to Miriam Calderón. She's a consultant with the BUILD Initiative, and she will serve as today's moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerry, so much. Good afternoon, everyone. As Gerry referenced, this webinar is very relevant to the new competitive preference priority in the round 3 of the Race to the Top application. As you are aware, in the first round of Race to the Top, sustaining effects in K through 3rd grades was an invitational priority, and it has been elevated in this round of the competition to be a competitive preference priority worth 10 points. We believe that this is signaling the importance of this issue for the administration and their desire to see birth to 5 systems that are better aligned with K-12 systems to ensure that improved outcomes for children are sustained in the elementary years. The priority allows you to think about alignment between birth to 5 systems and the early elementary grades in a very broad sense, thinking about teaching and learning, thinking about transitions, and thinking about how to ensure comprehensive services are provided in the elementary grades, our health strategies and our family engagement strategies. It's an opportunity to to open the door to greater partnerships with the K-12 system. And again, think about vertical alignment, not just from a 3rd grade down approach, but from a birth up approach. How are we carrying and bringing forward developmentally informed whole child approaches in our state plans into our K through 12 system? We're so fortunate today to have 3 experts in P3 instruction to be able to present information and guide this conversation. They will be talking about research around the status of K3 instruction, which will be incredibly helpful in your thinking about what your needs might be in your state as you craft responses to this plan, as well as talking about the First School approach, as Gerry referenced, that has a lot of relevance for what you might do in this K3 approach, including in a cross-state fashion, as well as how to meet the needs of your high-need populations with these kinds of interventions. And I'll just say in my own experience how much and how impressed I am with the First School approach, both for its commitment to equity as well as its respect for teachers and assurance and focus on giving them the supports that they need to provide developmentally informed instruction. I want to echo again that we really encourage questions and discussion throughout this webinar, and I'll be monitoring the chat box as well as the activity online to make sure that we can get your information and get your questions answered as we go through the next hour and a half together. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sharon Ritchie, who's going to lead us off.
I would lead us off if I could make the next screen show up. There we go. Good afternoon. We welcome our audience and are very pleased to have the opportunity to present our First School work for your consideration. And we're just slow on these buttons as we get used to this here.
If they're not working for you, I can turn it for you, Sharon. Just let me know.
Why don't you go ahead and do that? And I'll just signal you when I need a new slide.
Okay.
Okay. Our goals are twofold. It's to talk about our past and current work and how it contributes to the North Carolina Early Learning Challenge goals, as well as to strengthen your state efforts to improve pre-K to 3rd grade experiences for children, teachers, and administrators. Next slide, please. The team at First School are early and ongoing leaders in pre-K to 3rd grade reform. Our efforts stemmed from our work in the National Center for Early Development and Learning in 1999 to 2001. Comprehensive data from 11 states revealed that we were simply not doing enough at pre-K and kindergarten to ensure success, especially for the most vulnerable populations. This, coupled with long-held beliefs that the notion of development should reach well into the K-12 education system, was our impetus for First School. Kellogg and Foundation for Child Development have been great supporters of pre-K through 3rd grade work, especially with Kellogg and their focus on equity, and we have been fortunate to be funded by both of them. Kellogg has supported us throughout all the years of our efforts. We've had a chance to be quite currently involved in the Early Learning Challenge think tank for the KEA and formative assessment. So this allows us to be at the table, to be getting our ideas on the table about how we're going to move forward in this very important area, as well as being able to learn and benefit from all the partners that are with us there. In November, Teachers College Press will release our book, First School, Transforming Pre-K through Third Grade Education for African American, Latino, and Low-Income Children. We're particularly pleased to have had the opportunity to write that book. For those of you who are ever in processes of writing, is that you know how succinct you have to become in your thinking and how clear you have to be. And I think that that opportunity to write a book helped us get our ideas on the page, and I think it helped us be better at what we do. 3-4 years ago, it became obvious to me that there were a lot of people across the nation who were thinking about pre-K through third grade reform. And I was worried that we would take off in too many different directions. And so we gathered a group of us together in sort of an informal work group, and we've worked together ever since. People like Christy Cowers and Tom Schultz and Chris Maxwell and Lisa Guernsey, people who are really in the forefront of this work, and that we meet quarterly to make sure that we're sharing common language, that we're keeping issues on the table. We had a chance to do a series of 8 webinars last year to get these notions out. So I think that that's helped us be very clear about pre-K-3. And then we've had the opportunity to have development and leadership roles in all of the major initiatives in North Carolina, Power of K, Ready Schools, and the demo sites, as well as a dropout prevention grant, so that we've managed to remain in every single opportunity that's been given in North Carolina for us to really think about these issues. Next slide, please. We learned many lessons from our years of working with individual schools and teachers. It became evident that teachers simply could not make substantial changes in their practices without support from their administrators, the district office, and the state. We have built on our initial work and focus now on more systemic efforts to reform pre-K through third grade education. Our current work is funded in a variety of ways. We have North Carolina Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge funds to work in collaboration with the Department of Public Instruction's Office of Early Learning to facilitate First School in 2 counties in North Carolina. These districts were selected as they serve high minority, high poverty populations and struggle with underperformance. In the Lansing School District in Michigan, we used Title I and II funds to allow us to collect classroom observation data in every pre-K through 12th grade classroom in the district. The data is used to determine and drive professional development efforts and to monitor progress. A private foundation funds a North Carolina district to support pre-K and kindergarten teachers to collaborate and communicate with one another with the goal of making the experiences of young children more seamless as they move through their early years. Today we'll have the opportunity to elucidate the content and process of our work. And I'm going to pass this over to Natasha Clark to talk more. Oh, do I have another slide? What do I have? I missed one. Ah, yes, I didn't. Sorry. First School. These are the main things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how we facilitate the development of a culture of collaborative inquiry. We're going to talk about how our research and professional development and data are all linked together, particularly with a focus on minority students and those living in poverty. And we're going to really talk about how we use a different kind of lens through which for teachers to view their practice. And now I'll let Natasha talk.
Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Our educational systems frequently state their commitment that all children will learn, but many classrooms and routines, their instructional practices hinder meeting the needs of all learners. Despite good intentions and hard work, educational disparities continue to exist for children with high needs. Research shows that 80% of teachers are white, middle-class women, teaching to a 65% culturally and linguistically diverse special population. Many classrooms reflect the disconnect teachers feel in meeting the needs of children who live in poverty, English language learners, boys, African American, and Latino children. Thus, the focus of First School is equity-driven. Using research concerning closing the achievement and opportunity gap, we help teachers deepen their understanding of the educational environment they design for learning. First School moves the conversation about student data from evaluation of teachers to teachers reflecting on their practice, looking for ways to meet the needs of specific learners. In this way, teachers capitalize on student strengths instead of deficits, and these small instructional changes can make a big difference, and we will show you the impact later on in the presentation. But our next slide looks at how do we focus on equity. First School has organized 10 research-based instructional practices into a framework designed to foster classroom cultures of caring, competence, and excellence. This slide outlines the framework, the cultures, and the 3 or 4 instructional strategies, or what you might like to think of as priority 4, protective factors that have been identified as highly beneficial for African American, Latino, and low-income children in pre-K to 3rd grade environments. Let's talk about each one of these cultures. First, a culture of caring needs to be in place before substantive learning can occur. It is foundational to children's success as it ensures that they feel safe, valued, and accepted by adults and classmates. This means nurturing the whole child and teaching with a positive relationship. Second, a culture of competence ensures each child is a productive, successful, and contributing member of the classroom team. This means providing plenty of opportunities to have students to make choices throughout the day, teaching students to self-regulate, and then provide them with opportunities to practice these skills. Teachers develop in their children the ability to work with their peers towards common goals or collaboration. Children need to be actively engaged in their learning, and one of the best ways to make this happen is to provide a variety of opportunities for them to verbally express what they know, how they personally connect to the learning, and what it all means to them. And finally, the culture of excellence, which may be the most important culture of all. It enables each learner to excel beyond minimal competencies. It is essential teachers provide high expectations for student learners and then give children the necessary support to meet these expectations. Too many struggling schools lower their expectations for those children with instruction that focuses on skill and drill activities. Instead, the culture of excellence promotes the use of open-ended questions, scaffolding, and reflecting, in which students make connections, verbally explain their thinking, and build metacognitive skills. At this point, you might be saying to yourself, well, those instructional practices benefit all children, and you are exactly right. But the absence of these research-based instructional practices is particularly detrimental to minority and poor children. Incorporating one or more is beneficial for many students, but First School views this framework as a complete package and believes that focusing on all 10 is what will ensure sustained academic and social-emotional success for each child. Full implementation equals a high-quality classroom and improved child outcomes. And as we move forward, you will see how the data is linked to the research-based instructional practices framework.
Thank you so much. Samantha, if I could interject here, we've had a question about how you, in your experience, how you've been able to, or how build buy-in and for this work, and specifically for allocating resources like Title I and Title II to be able to support the First School intervention.
Well, basically what we have done is, as we have selected our partners in terms of who to work with, for us at this point it's been a competitive process where, for instance, in the Early Learning Challenge grant here in North Carolina, the state had a transformation zone area, districts that were struggling that they certainly wanted to target their support to. And so all of those were identified as potential partners. And out of the ones that were targeted, 75% of them were interested in partnering with us. And so we went through an extensive process of meeting with the district leadership, boards of education, superintendents, principals, and teacher leaders to see how aligned they were, how interested they were, how committed they were to really improving pre-K through third grade education. And in most of the places that we went, we really found that there's been so much emphasis on third grade through 12th grade, and people really are beginning to recognize that if the focus doesn't start earlier, if there isn't a comprehensive system that meets the needs of the children from the first moment they walk into our doors, they're definitely have a lot going against them in order to be successful. So anyway, we went through this competitive process, and we initially were only supposed to select one district, but we found 2 districts that we just couldn't choose between, and actually ended up facilitating a collaborative between them. So it doubles our work, but we also know that it doubles the rewards and the success in the field.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. And we've also had a clarifying question. Does the First School intervention work with community-based childcare and Head Start, so pre-K that is not just school-based?
Okay, so I think that's where we have the crossover between the Ready Schools work and the First School work. The Ready Schools work really worked with Smart Start to have Smart Start agencies or local agencies partner with school districts with the effort of improving that transition as children moved from community child care into the school system, and who needs to be at the table, what conversations need to take place, and what kinds of, to move away from transition as an activity to transition as a continuum. Where people started sharing professional development between the community child care or Head Start or whatever their agencies were, started sharing that professional development, started including parents and children in making that move between the two systems. So I really think it's the overlap of that kind of work that really brings everybody to the table, because although the lion's share of our work takes place within state-funded pre-K, we really recognize the importance of making sure that all the children make that seamless transition, and that only a very small percentage of the kids come out of the in-school pre-K. So how do we really expand that?
Great. Thank you, Sharon.
Okay, so this is Sam Ortwig, and what I'd like to do now is to focus your attention on a few of the specifics of the Early Learning Challenge grant proposal. We found any number of places within the proposal where First School work fits in, but we believe that there are 2 areas where we have the most strength. Improving the school experience for African American, Latino, and low-income children in grades pre-K through 3rd grade is and has been our major focus, and this is the absolute priority for the grant. And as you know, the purpose of today's webinar is to talk about priority 4. So this is now where we will focus our conversation today on improving and sustaining early learning. Next slide. In terms of priority 4, what grant reviewers will be looking for is how well your grant proposal describes a systematic approach to sustaining the learning gains children 0 to 5 make as a result of high-quality programs and initiatives. The research is very clear that no matter how well children do in the early years, high-quality educational experiences must be provided to children when they enter elementary school in order to prevent fade-out. High-quality learning experiences in the early years does not automatically translate to success in the years to come. However, there is abundant research out there demonstrating a significant correlation to the level of children's learning by 3rd grade and their levels of success in high school and beyond. Therefore, it is imperative that states place an emphasis on developing an aligned, high-quality system of teaching and learning for children in pre-K through 3rd grade. Next slide. In the next 2 slides, let's look at the specific language of different aspects of Priority 4. From there, we will share with you how First School can support your state in its efforts to improve the school experiences for children in pre-K through 3rd grade. As you see on this slide, subsection C focuses on implementation of professional development programs concentrated on developmental science, protective factors, and instructional practices that meet the developmental needs of children socially, emotionally, and academically. It is important to note that developmental science remains a missing component from the elementary conversation on improving instruction. Although developmental domains are incorporated regularly into programs for children 0 to 5, teachers and caregivers do not necessarily take into account aspects such as brain research, attachment theory, and self-regulation, and how all of these things apply to teaching and learning. And while thinking about the whole child is a major focus of caregivers and teachers for children 0 to 5, that is where it ends. Despite the well-recognized fact that the early developmental continuum goes through age 8, elementary teachers and their leaders generally know nothing about the relatively new science of developmental science. We have few instruments that measure it, and we place little to no societal value on it. However, we do have a ton of research that says it is absolutely important to success. Therefore, we need to shift to an educational perspective in which time spent on developing relationships is seen as classroom time well spent, where behavioral issues are seen as teachable moments rather than a time for metering out discipline or punishment, and where there is no separation between children's academic growth and their social emotional development. Early childhood people need to increase their sophistication of their knowledge base, while those working with children in K through 3rd grade need to learn how development continues and how to support healthy development through the instructional choices they make. Next slide. Here in Section E, you can see that states are asked to enhance their data systems to monitor student progress. There is tremendous power in data to serve as a comprehensive needs assessment and as a way to monitor progress. In general, educators tend to think about data as standardized assessments measuring student progress, but there is so much more that can be known about teaching and learning and how well the needs of struggling populations of children are being met. So it is important for states to consider what are the predictors of positive outcome for children and how do we begin to measure them. We know that specific populations of children, in particular boys of color, are overrepresented in discipline referrals, special education classes, and grade retention. But we have little documentation about what is routinely happening to them in their classrooms. Bringing together multiple pieces of data from a variety of sources can be an effective way of presenting a cohesive picture of the current state of affairs and determining a clear pathway for improvement along with documented progress. Next slide. So in terms of meeting the requirements of priority 4, C, and E, here are some things that First School can do. We can certainly provide the professional development need to build a cadre of pre-K-3 experts in your state. All states have teams of professionals who support struggling schools. Unfortunately, it has been our experience in our work around the country that few of these individuals are specialists in early childhood with a working knowledge of best practices for children ages 3 to 8. There is strong support for grades 3rd through 12th, but little support for the beginning years. In fact, oftentimes well-meaning individuals push instructional practices that fly in the face of developmental science and are a detriment to young learners. Having a cadre of pre-K through 3rd grade experts can truly revolutionize your state's ability to get children off to the right start early. We haven't yet talked about the snapshot, and we'll get into that in greater detail, but the snapshot is an observational measure that has been First School's major contribution to building and enhancing data systems as well as improving pre-K-3 education, especially for high-needs children. The important point here is that we can and will help you to use data from this measure as a part of your comprehensive needs assessment and to measure progress toward your goals. We will train your own people as certified snapshot data collectors, and we will analyze the results of the data collection. And we will prepare your pre-K-3 experts as coaches who can effectively present the data to teachers and administrators and work with them to improve practice. Next slide. In terms of developing your pre-K through grade 3 experts, First School will ensure that they are grounded in effective pedagogy that is aligned with all state standards and meets the social, emotional, and academic needs of the struggling populations of the children you serve. These people will be well informed about developmental science, protective factors for high-needs children, current brain research, and research-based practices that support young learners. And they will also be capable coaches who can work with others to improve teaching and learning through the use of the Snapshot Professional Learning System.
Next slide. As Sam has said, our work is grounded in classroom observation data. We believe that data used as inquiry rather than evaluation reinvigorates professionalism and helps to build cultures of caring, competence, and excellence not only for children, but for teachers and administrators as well. Our overall goal is always to improve the school experiences of young children. We, of course, want their test scores to improve, but believe that the real work is making sure that each and every minute of a child's day contributes to her belief that she is smart, valuable, and valued, and is a contributing member of a classroom and school community. So data itself is valuable in that it helps develop reflective practice. It really allows people to move into a mode of continuous improvement where they're not feeling so much that they have to be right all the time, but rather that it's okay to admit to struggling, it's okay to learn from others, and it's okay to take a leadership role. Basically, all we're trying to do is improve the quality of what happens to children each day. Next slide, please. So the First School Snapshot was developed 20 years ago. I'm one of the lead authors on it, and we have used it in many studies. I talked about the NCDL studies earlier, and we used it as a measure that complemented the Eckers in the class throughout those studies. And I've already talked about some of the studies that we're doing now in Michigan and in North Carolina. In terms of really using this data for the comprehensive needs assessment and progress monitoring. Next slide. So the First School Snapshot is a time sampling measure. And basically, we are in classrooms with iPads looking at a random selection of boys and girls and looking at their minute-by-minute experiences. So data collection is actually a full day in every single classroom that's involved in whatever projects that we're working in. And we tend to look at 4 children, and we start with minute 1 for child 1, move to child 2 for the next minute, child 3 for the minute after that, and child 4 after that, and start all over again so that there is a very comprehensive view. The things that we're looking at is what activity settings are they engaged in? Are they in whole group? Are they in small group? Are they having opportunities to choose? Are they having meals and snacks? How much time are they spending in transitions? How much time do they get to be outside? Then in child engagement, in content in literacy, in math, in social studies, in art and music and dance, in science, how much time do they get to spend in those different content areas throughout the day? And then what teaching approaches are they experiencing? Are the teachers mostly didactic in their approach, simply telling kids information, providing models? Are they also being scaffolded? Are they being asked open-ended questions? Are their unique needs being addressed? Are teachers paying attention to how they need to move children up in their understanding? Are they being reflective? Are they being able to engage in metacognitive approaches? And then finally, in ambience is what kind of rule structures are in the classroom, how much collaboration takes place, and we'll show you over the next many slides how some of that data looks and some of the conversations that we have. Next slide, please. As most of you are well-versed in the Common Core and or state standards, you recognize that the processes such as collaboration, integration, problem solving, and peer interaction are inherent. This is not content, and content is what is usually measured and assessed. In order to know more about how teachers are instructing in accord with the Common Core and state standards, it is essential that we also get to the process. We believe that the snapshot captures these processes in multiple ways. Next slide.
Sharon?
Yes.
We've had a question about alignment with this work and teacher evaluation in K-12 systems. Can you speak to that?
Will you ask that question again, Miriam?
Sure. So thinking about this work in the greater context of teacher evaluation in K-12.
We have certainly done work in terms of aligning the North Carolina teacher evaluation system with the work that we do. The data that we provide to individual teachers is kept confidential to them. We only provide to districts and administrators school-wide data and district-wide data. So teachers are the ones who get their own individual data. But many of them have chosen to use the data as documentation of the improvements and progress that they are making. Many of them have written the things that they focus on, that they self-select to focus on from reviewing their data. They write that into their plan and then use subsequent data collection to show the improvements that they've made in that area. So this work definitely has been incorporated into the evaluation schema.
I think also here again about process is that so much of the teacher evaluation asks for teachers to reflect, to collaborate, to participate in groups, to look at things horizontally as well as vertically, and I think that the data really supports those efforts as well. Okay, I think you're on, Natasha.
Okay, so as promised, we said that we would look at some examples of data, and we're going to do that by looking at it through the First School lens with the research-based instructional strategies framework and the snapshot data with Common Core and state standards, and then we'll look at the impact on a teacher's instructional practice. Next slide. So looking at the research. In many classrooms, teachers are still the ones doing most of the talking. Teachers equate their talking to teaching. Teachers feel compelled to impart as much knowledge as possible in the limited time frames they are given. First School data across the nation has highlighted that classrooms have a culture of silence. Teachers and administrators view the quiet classroom as well managed and assume this is the optimal learning environment. However, research shows that culture of silence is not an effective pedagogy. Our work focuses on ending the culture of silence. Without oral language activities, children often either quickly forget new information or fail to gain an adequate understanding of how and when to use such knowledge. Oral language activities with reflection and scaffolded questions are essential to students' learning and guide teachers in diagnostic assessment of learning. These higher order thinking oral language activities are even more important for children from low socioeconomic backgrounds and young children. And finally, vocabulary development or expanding and using sophisticated vocabulary is vital for young learners. As the last bullet points out, vocabulary proficiency is a predictor of academic achievement beginning as early as the 3rd grade. Thus, early educators have an important responsibility to provide not just a language-rich environment, but a vocabulary-robust environment for children in the early years of school. This lays a solid foundation for sustained language and literacy outcomes later in life. Next slide. So, in this slide, we see the alignment of state standards along with Common Core state standards with research. The Common Core standards adopted by many states include the notion that students must have ample opportunity to develop their writing, speaking and listening, and language or vocabulary skills. The Common Core has specific strands to address literacy components. As you'll see on the slide, we have the writing strand, speaking and listening strand, and the language strand. Notice some of the wording that aligns with the research-based instructional framework. Under collaboration, students must learn to work together to express and listen carefully to ideas, integrate information from oral, visual, quantitative, and media sources. So classrooms should not have a culture of silence, but classrooms should be environments in which students engage in their learning, not by listening or hearing just the teacher, but peer collaboration that allows them to use their academic vocabulary and build higher order thinking skills. And whether states have adopted Common Core or not, their own standards address alignment with the research. For instance, if you see at the bottom of the slide, Iowa's Early Learning Standard of Area 10, which addresses communication, language, and literacy. Next slide. So here is data from the snapshot. This is a sample graph that was generated from a school observation across pre-K to 3rd grade. It's an average student day, school day, and this we would consider to be the national trend of data. The graph notes the percentage of the school day in which students participated in the following literacy activities: modeling of fluency or being read to by the teacher, whole language activities, which include access to text and comprehension activities, phonics, oral language, vocabulary, and when students participate in the writing process, composing, and then finally copying. Remember, this is not just the literacy block. but it measures the opportunity in which students have embedded or integrated literacy across the curriculum, which includes math, science, social studies. And as a reminder, when we look at graphs, the percentage of the day, or 1% of the day, equals about 4 minutes. So think of the percentages as the percentage of teaching time or minutes in which students receive this type of instruction. The positive here in this graph is that students are receiving time in whole language, print or comprehension activities, and phonics activities. Close to 40 minutes of a day in phonics and more in print and comprehension activities. But we also know that students need a balanced, literacy-rich curriculum, which involves time to talk about their learning, time to write, and vocabulary development. Here students are receiving limited oral language activities and less opportunities to write, and even less vocabulary development activities, especially in the younger grades. And this is an alarming trend that we continue to see in First School Snapshot data. It is alarming because we know the impact of weak vocabulary development in the early years. Poor to little instruction impacts the academic trajectory for students. How can students have only 12 minutes per day of intentional vocabulary development in which they have participated in other vocabulary-rich content areas such as math, science, language arts, and social studies? This is the data, however, that opens up the conversation on instructional practice with teachers. Next slide. So here is the impact of Snapshot. Remember that 1% equals 4 minutes, and with this first grade teacher, we have time 1 data, which occurred in the spring, and the interim data, or time 2, is in the fall. And this teacher chose to intentionally work on changing her literacy program for her students. So the graph reports the percentage of the school day in which students participated in the following literacy activities: being read to by the teacher, whole language, phonics, oral language, vocabulary, participating in the writing process or composition, and copying. The positive here is that students are receiving time in a balanced approach compared to time 1. Instead of 20 minutes a day of reading, it has increased to 48 minutes. You see the teacher's effort to have time for students to talk about their learning has increased, as well as time to write has increased. Imagine the impact of the vocabulary development from 12 minutes to 60 minutes. These improvements were made without buying a new vocabulary program, but allowing the teacher to reflect on her data to make changes and refine her instructional practices. And as that fine-tuning and continuous improvement process occurs, the teacher can see the changes where in whole language she might have sacrificed some of her instructional plan within that particular area. But that would be an opportunity to make more improvements. Next slide. So how can a percentage point or just 4 minutes a day really make a big difference? Well, for this teacher, the increase from 3% to 15% is 12 minutes to 60 minutes as far as vocabulary development. Think of this as your conversion table. Think of this slide as your conversion table and how powerful it can be when you start to do the math. Overall, students receive more instruction. More instruction in a few minutes can turn into weeks of instruction. Now reflect on the 20-minute increase or the 15-minute increase and the trajectory of the students. The impact of the snapshot can be multiplied further. Snapshot can impact teacher practice that school year and for many more school years to come. It can impact the learning of many children that year with a year of high-quality instruction, and hopefully as a child receives multiple years of high-quality instruction, their academic trajectory will improve and be sustained. So yes, teachers making small changes can make a big difference.
Next slide. Okay. Another example I'd like to share focuses on the development of self-regulation. While self-regulation is often addressed in the early learning standards, the work done in early childhood to develop autonomy, self-regulation, and independence often gets undone in elementary classrooms by high levels of teacher control, as we usually see exhibited. Rather than growing up notions of choice and play, these important developmental supports are removed once a child enters through the kindergarten door. We think about arbitrary rules, and we ask teachers to think about where children get into trouble and whether or not they can change their practices to eliminate some of these pitfalls. Does too much time on the carpet or too much time sitting at a desk support learning, or does it interfere? Many of the things that teachers do as the way we do school are not questioned in terms of whether or not they actually meet the needs of the children. We help teachers think about how physical activity and movement can be used to support learning and to raise levels of student engagement. And we also help them to understand the importance of incorporating student interest and student voice as a way of engaging interest and engagement. And we help them think about how you do grow up opportunities for choice as they go through their day. So next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
There we go.
Thank you. So here we see, as Sharon mentioned earlier, that the snapshot data looks at two items, collaboration and autonomy. And we see that here is reflected time one. So in terms of collaboration is the first set of the two bars. As you know, the Common Core Standards is very emphatic about children having opportunities to work together, to hear perspectives of one another, and to be able to be collaborative. And we see time one, only 4% of the day where the children intentionally engaged in collaborating with one another. That translates to 16 minutes a day. Whereas in time two, we have 13% of the day. So that actually translates, as Natasha mentioned earlier, into weeks more throughout the course of the school year that children would have to engage with one another, focused around content and meaningful learning. And in the second set of bars, we see flexibility. And flexibility for us means the lack of arbitrary rules. So in the first graph, first bar, we see that the children spent only 10% of their day in the absence of arbitrary rules. This is not unusual at all. And as we mentioned, it's something that usually surprises teachers about how controlling they are. And one of the things that I know from my days in the classroom is that controlling the energy of others, and also as an administrator at the adult level, controlling other people's energy is about the most exhausting thing that one can do in a day. And so helping teachers to recognize that they can give up some control, and actually they will be a lot happier and their students will be a lot happier. They're hesitant at first, but as they begin to let that happen, they find that chaos does not rule supreme, that children actually are much more capable than they give them credit for. And our teachers honestly look back when they see the graph of what they used to be like before and now how they are, and they laugh at themselves, thinking back about how controlling they once were, and for no reason other than that's what they thought they were supposed to do as teachers. So one of the things that I always like to do is when I look at the data, I like to think, which classroom would you want your very own child to be in? The classroom shown here on time 1 or the classroom shown on time 2? Next slide.
Sam, this is Miriam. Could you also clarify what the length of the program day is, or is this a typical school day, the data that you're presenting?
It's about 6.5 hours. You know, we follow the children from the time school starts in the classroom till the time that it ends.
And if the hours are longer, then we would change the numbers. But this is how it has panned out in the majority of schools we've been in.
Yeah, it's about a 6.5 hour day. Okay, so on our next slide here, we're going to look at teaching approaches. And one of the things that the research has shown is that in low-performing schools, schools where there are a lot of African American and Latino children, they often have much less time to explore materials on their own, and they have fewer opportunities to be autonomous and for higher order thinking. One of the things that we have typically seen and the research supports is that the lower the performing the school, the more emphasis there is on skill and drill and the less higher order thinking that goes on. And so we think about the kind of teaching approaches that really support the children to have the best trajectory for success. And another thing that we have noted is that male students in didactic classrooms are more stressed than males in developmentally appropriate classrooms. And since we know that boys tend to get in trouble far more than girls and struggle more with school, we definitely feel that that's an important aspect to consider in teaching and learning. Next slide. So looking at the Common Core, we see how the Common Core links with that research in the sense that the Common Core asks students, even the youngest of students, to really master complex skills. We're looking at having children routinely be able to analyze, to support their thoughts, to compare and contrast, to integrate, to explain relationships, draw inferences, summarize, paraphrase, all things that require higher order thinking. And in order for those things to happen, teachers must use scaffolded instruction and reflection as a major part of their teaching. And if we look at New York in terms of their early learning guidelines, we see that even for students younger than kindergarten, reflection and interpretation is a very important aspect of their development and growth. Next slide. So here on this graph, we see teaching approaches. And we're going to put, before I get into really describing the graph, I would like to state that the reason why we focus on change at the individual teacher level is because part of reinvigorating professionalism involves teachers selecting their own goals. We ask the teachers to look at their data and reflect, is this the kind of teacher that you want to be? And if not, what is it that you would like to change? And again, I think this goes to the buy-in, whereas the data is not being used to beat up teachers and tell them once again that they're not doing a good job, but rather as a way to springboard into conversation about being the very best that you can be. And many teachers are initially stunned by the data. Their first response, and many times, is to write it off. Oh no, this can't be my data. Oh, that was an unusual day, blah, blah, blah. But yet, as they kind of sit with the data a while, and then the next day they go back into their classrooms and they start noticing, oh, you know, I do talk a lot. Oh man, I do have a lot of arbitrary rules. This begins to generate their interest in making changes. And, you know, there's nothing like success to breed more success. Teachers make small incremental changes, and they see that it has very positive results, that they're happier as teachers, that their children are happier and more productive learners, and it spurs them to make even more changes. So in the first graph here, what we're looking at is teaching approaches in during math instruction and during literacy instruction. And just look at the part on the left-hand side, and you will see that in math, 74% of the teaching time during math instruction is dedicated to didactic instruction. And as Sharon mentioned, didactic instruction is providing information, examples, models to children. It's asking them right or wrong questions that have right or wrong answers, one-word answer types of questions. And this is kind of what we think about as sort of typical teacher talk in the classroom. And then you see that only 9% of the math instruction uses scaffolded instruction. And scaffolded instruction is where teachers ask open-ended questions, where they probe for deeper understanding, where they engage in feedback loops with children where, you know, again, they're asking more than one question and helping the children to really express their thoughts. And then reflection, we see that no reflection is going on. Reflection is what is metacognition. It's where the children have opportunities to express their thought processes in terms of how they got to the answers that they got to. So, for example, it would be having a child describe how they got to the answer in math, what clues helped them make a prediction, or what clues gave them, helped them to know how to approach a problem and to solve it. And then we look at literacy, and we see, although math has higher didactic than the literacy block does, we see still a heavy reliance on didactic instruction, and there is certainly more scaffolded instruction in literacy. When we ask teachers about that, because this is a very typical trend that we see. In fact, we often see 90% didactic instruction in math and only 10% of or less in the other categories. And they say, well, that's because math just has one right answer, whereas literacy is more open-ended. And so what we engage in conversation with them about is math may have one right answer, but there are a lot of different ways to get to the right answer. And as we know, the Common Core is much more focused on process than product. And that's how we help to build that higher order thinking in our students.
So, Sam, before you go to the next slide, we've had a question. If you could just comment on what would you like to see? So what would be the sort of appropriate kind of targets or balance between didactic, scaffolded, and reflective instruction in a school day?
Okay, well, I wasn't going to go to that next slide yet, but that's perfect because that's what I was going to do. If you look at the right side of the slide there, this shows the kind of change that occurs when a teacher chooses to make this their emphasis of focus. And that's what we like to see, a really good balance. Certainly we know that teachers have to provide key information to students, but we don't know how much of it they've understood or how much of it they've been able to retain unless we engage them in rich conversations about that material. So here you see in math the change going from 9% scaffolded instruction to, in time, to 50% scaffolded instruction. That is a truly beautiful thing. And we now see 3% of the math instruction dedicated to reflection. And in literacy, we see the very same type of shift with even higher levels of scaffolded instruction, having students really talk about their thoughts, their ideas, their connection to the learning, their understanding of the material, and then more time as well being spent reflecting on it.
We really resist having a simple answer to that question. First of all, I don't think there's any research that says you should have X percent of this and X percent of that. There's certainly a lot of research that says that you should have balanced teaching approaches. But I think you have to take into account every time you do this work with teachers that they have different grade levels. They have different kids from one year to the next. They might be teaching in small group. They might be starting a new unit where it requires more didactic instruction. So we really want teachers to think about their own practices, for grade levels to think about it, for schools to think about it, and not just simply provide an exact answer. But it is always about balance, and it's always about trying to get better at what you're doing and to really think about what's working for your kids. And it's my turn. Next slide, please. So going back to another element of Priority 4, as we look at Section D of Priority 4, it's important to note that the largest gap in pre-K to third grade education occurs between pre-K and kindergarten. When implementing model systems of collaboration, what is key is getting people to talk to one another and make some headway in uniting the best of early childhood, 0 to 5, and elementary education, and helping people see the contributions of each to children's learning and well-being. We believe that the snapshot data provides a unique perspective on seamless experiences for children and provides an avenue for communication that is productive. Next slide, please. So the things that I think that we can add to the conversation about seamlessness is the data that demonstrates the degree to which practices are seamless, and then also for us to serve in a advisory capacity. We know that new ideas, mandates, expectations, etc. abound. This has left too many teachers feeling burnt out, disrespected, and helpless. They see themselves as needing to lie low and to tolerate mandates and programs that are visited upon them in great numbers rather than feeling motivated to contribute their voice to key pedagogical decisions. In order to support teachers and provide the motivation to stay engaged with the work, we have found it essential to make their work seamless as well. We align our efforts with the Common Core, with their school improvement plans and their state standards so that they do not feel so overwhelmed. Our efforts with states will be to customize the work we do together by integrating the standards and practices of the state and reviewing and developing policies and practices that bring people together and promote seamlessness. Research supports the contribution of seamlessness across the pre-K-3 span to achieving high quality. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at another example of how research and data and standards help improve the conversation and improve instruction. Next slide. So really, why do we care about seamlessness? And we care because it is about sustaining the effort across the pre-K through third grade span. That's what the competitive priority is all about, is how do you take the very good things that happen for kids 0 and 5 and hold on to them, and what human resources help that happen, what policies help that happen, what environments, and these are all things that you have to think about if you're thinking about seamlessness. Next slide, please. When we think about data, we're not, we've been showing you a lot of individual classroom data, but we think one of the most important conversations is looking at the developmental continuum by looking at the data. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to look at two things, and particularly one is where are the dramatic shifts that take place, and where is there the static sameness, where things don't change at all even though kids get older and develop. Next slide. I think we're always looking to support whatever we do through research, and I think the research on children's academic trajectories is probably one of the most important things for us to always attend to, that getting children off to a good start matters, and what teachers do matters. What happens to these children when they're young affects their academic trajectories. If they do not have two good years in a row, if they have two bad years in a row, it really impacts exactly what's going to happen to them later on. And we know that if they have negative perceptions of their own competence, if they do not believe that they are valued and valuable, that they are not going to believe that school is the place for them, and they are not going to be able to succeed in the ways that we need them to. Next slide. This is a particularly powerful picture in terms of if you look particularly between pre-K and K. These are the activity settings that children engage in throughout their day. This is data that we've seen for 20 years and remains unchanging, in that on the backs of 5- and 6-year-olds, we have children move from having about 37% of their day in choice to 6% of their day in choice, where whole group time moves from 24% to 49% of the day, where meals and snacks are cut in half, and their expectations for working on their own, which is the label of individual, is at a quarter of a day that a 5-year-old is expected to be in charge of their own learning. There's not a lot of balance. There are lots of things that don't happen at all for kids in both situations. And then if you look at what happens between K, first and second, and if we had the third grade graph on there, it would look exactly the same, is that we don't see very much change, that somehow or other the activity settings we provide for children when they're 5 years old are the same as when they're 8 years old. So I think that when we have these graphs and we put pre-K and K teachers in a room together and have them really think that they should be thinking about what they do in the course of the day, not based on a schedule, but based on their children, and how do you share the philosophies and the goals between pre-K and K to meet the actual needs of the children. It is just too much of a stark change for a 5-year-old to have one impression of school be so dramatically affected by simply moving into their next year. Next slide, please. So here we have again another teacher who made some real intentional changes in her practice. And we see that basics, which are transitions, where she was spending 92% of the day, or 92 minutes a day in transitions, she moved that to 40 minutes a day. That is just a huge savings of time that is allowed to be given to other things. She recognized that children need to have more than just lunch in the course of the day. So often in public schools, kids, they go to lunch at 10:45 or they have lunch at 1:30, and there's no snacks the whole rest of the day. So we talk about health and we talk about nutrition and the importance of kids being hydrated and having opportunities for food for food and water throughout the day. She paid attention a little bit to the, lowering the amount of time that kids were involved in being in charge of their own learning by about 12 minutes a day. She was able to think about having small group instruction and move that from about 4 minutes a day to 24 minutes a day. She was able to have more stations or centers, moved from 16 minutes a day to 60 minutes a day, where kids were able to work together to have hands-on experiences. Still struggling with the notion of choice. We spend a lot of time, as Sam said, helping people grow up that notion of choice. I think we still struggle with the notions of play and choice being so condemned once we enter the K-12 system. But at least the stations allowed kids the opportunity to have some choices about what they were doing. She got whole group down by about 24 minutes a day and was really upset with herself that there was still that much whole group. But this is a teacher who actively said, I have to think about changing my instruction on behalf of my children, and these were the kinds of changes that she was able to make. Next slide. So these are just some of our overall project findings. Overall, for all of the pre-K through third grade classrooms in 7 different schools in 2 different states, we saw a drop in transition time by a 4% drop. And if you multiply that out over the course of the year, that's 5 additional days of instructional time. But I think the biggest thing was this huge increase in teaching time, that overall we moved from sort of teachers interacting with children 50% of the day to interacting with them 70% of the day. This adds 36 days per school year of instructional time in each classroom. That is exponential change. And then you think about all of the other things that got added to that in the individual classrooms, with more time for oral language, more time for algebraic thinking, more time for social studies and science, less time for transition, is that you dramatically change what happens for children in classrooms. And teachers like this data. They love it. They look forward to it. They're excited to get it. They're not so excited the first time, but the second time they're really wanting to see it. Let me pass it back to Sam.
Okay, so as we kind of think about wrapping this up, I'd like to present a project scope for your grant proposal. Please know that this is just an example, and like everything we do, we are collaborative, flexible, and work to meet the contextual needs of those with whom we partner. So there is definitely room for customization. This is just a starting place. So the first thing that I would like to talk about is that we would do data collection in 200 pre-K through third grade classrooms. Certainly those sites would be identified by the state. We look at a fall data collection as being kind of the prime time for collecting this data. That way teachers get the data back early enough in the year where they still can have an impact on the students that they're currently working with. We also will look at having 7 state or district employees trained to reliability. As I talked earlier, the data collectors go through a very rigorous training operation in order to have them certified to be able to collect the data. And then we would do the data analysis and output all of the graphs for those 200 classrooms, as well as at the grade level, the school level, and the district level. So it would be for the individual teachers all the way up through the district level, or the state level. Yes, absolutely. We would conduct an annual week-long institute for state and district personnel to attend. This is goes back to the focus on building a cadre of pre-K through third grade expertise within your state. And then we would be available, we would come to you for bi-monthly consultation and coaching on data feedback and how to use the snapshot for continuous improvement. We look at coming for about 2 to 3 days at a time so that we really can do some in-depth work together. And then we know that there is interest in states working together, and that, as mentioned previously, this brings a real strength to the proposal. One of the major goals of having the Common Core state standards was to ensure greater consistency and commonality across our nation's public education system. Having multiple states working together to improve pre-K through third grade will further enhance this goal. In the true spirit of collaboration, each state partner would bring strengths to the table and could also benefit from the good work being done in other places. Together, we can all do more than any of us can do alone. First School can and will facilitate this process of state collaboration and the development of tools that can be used to sustain this work far into the future. Next slide. So, in terms of what we put out on the earlier slide that we would do for the state that receives the Early Learning Challenge grant, we would work to develop a more specific proposal, again, that is customized. But we feel that if in your grant you set aside $1.4 million for UNC's costs, that will cover, the work that we would engage in together. It's important to note as well that you would also have to consider additional costs that would not be included at our end, and that would include certainly evaluation for the project, and then the data collectors, their pay, because they would be either state or district employees, and their travel costs to the sites where they would collect the data, staff time that would be needed to oversee the collection process, meeting space and food for any meetings and institutes, and then staff travel to institutes and staff travel to state collaboration meetings. But the other things, as mentioned on the first slide, would be things that we would bring to that process.
Last slide.
So, in terms of next steps, Gerry is going to be sending a follow-up email that will provide a detailed description of the project as we mentioned it, and a questionnaire so that if interested states would complete that, then we could provide any grant proposal development support, including language that you could use in writing your grant. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon, Natasha, and Sam. We've had a couple of questions that I hope you comment on. The first is sort of related to the proposed project scope based on 200 pre-K through third grade classrooms. Do you have the numbers sort of off the top of your head around how many children that would serve?
Well, it depends on what the class, the teacher-child ratio is in the state. So it would be, very different. So if a classroom has, if a typical classroom has 30 kids across the state, it's going to be very different than when they've got 21 kids. So
thinking about an average of 20 children in a classroom, and that being maybe on the low side, that addresses 4,000 students in that 1 year.
Right.
Right.
We would do this for 4 years.
Great. And the other sort of the other question that I hope you could touch on briefly is how the First School intervention fits within the Cowards-Kaufman framework for a P3 approach.
Well, I think, that there are many of the buckets, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to be able to be specific, but many of the buckets that are part of Christy's framework. I think, Christy and I have worked a long time together, so we're very much in concert with one another. I wish I had the framework in front of me. I could speak it better, but I think that it's very much in concert with her ideas and the way that she sets up work in states, work in districts, and work in schools. I was part of the last Harvard group, and came to work with the different states and districts who were visiting there, and it all seemed to be in concert. I'm sorry you're catching me because I don't have it in front of me.
But one of the things that I think that it does is, Christy's framework is great in terms of this broad and overall scope and perspective. What First School does is helps bring all of that, drill that down to the classroom level, kind of where the rubber meets the road with the children. What is their actual experience, and how can we use what's happening to children and how to best meet their needs there. And so I think that, it really grounds and it works very well as kind of a complementary approach.
Great, thank you. Well, I want to, on behalf of the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative, thank you for this excellent presentation and just rich information around the status of instruction in P through third grade. I've had the opportunity to see some of this data before, but I'm just always struck by the power of it and by really, seeing what instruction and what the state of instruction and, as you said, Sam, what children's experiences look like in the classroom, how dramatically different it is between pre-K and kindergarten, and essentially how with just even sharing this kind of data and being able to start conversations with teachers, we can go so far in supporting their alignment of instructional practice with the developmental science about how we know children can learn and learn best. We have the last slide here, which I'm going to turn it back over to Gerry to sort of talk about the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative and any general announcements, as well as you see contact information for Sharon Ritchie and Sam if you are interested in learning more or have additional questions that you didn't get a chance to ask or get answered today. Thank you.
Thanks, Miriam, and I just want to echo your remarks and thanking Natasha and Sam and Sharon for this great presentation. I'm always just in awe when I see the data of the comparison between when they first started and then at the end of a period of working with a teacher, and to look at the data of what kids who aren't getting these opportunities are experiencing. And I have a nephew that's just going into third grade, and I know what we've experienced with him in his classrooms and his teachers over the last 3 years. So it's and what he got when he was in a high-quality early childhood program before he went off to school. So I wish for every child teachers who have learned from this approach that they've created. Just to close out, because I know everybody's rushing to get off for Friday afternoon, the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative is happy to support the preparation of your Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge application. If you have not already reached out to us, please do. If there's any way we can be supportive of your planning process, providing expert consultants, having someone review your draft to think about where there might be strengths or weaknesses to focus on, and thinking from the perspective of outside reviewers as well. Reach out to us and let us know how it can be supportive. Our goal is to have the very best application in all of your states possible. And whether you win a grant or not, the planning process you've gone through in developing that application is going to be so powerful and going forward. So if only we could raise enough money to have grants for everybody, that would be fantastic. We do have a couple more webinars planned next week to let you know about. You should have already gotten an invitation. One is on kindergarten entry assessment. That will be held on Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And the other one will be on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will focus on professional development and the workforce, particularly focusing on that section of the application. And last, as we've said as part of this webinar, but others as well, we are very interested in facilitating cross-state collaborations around aspects of the Early Learning Challenge application. If you have some ideas, or if you want to be part of a cross-state collaboration that we've shared with you over the course of these webinars, please contact us and let us know. We think this work is more powerful when we can do it together, and definitely want to hear from you. Well, thank you very much to all of our speakers and to all of you for tuning into this webinar today. We look forward to talking with you again next week. Bye, and have a great weekend. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.